Hi guys, I am Aaron Draws, and let's make Photoshop not suck. If you didn't know, Photoshop is my go-to program for art, but its defaults can be a bit unwieldy and probably turned off some people to the program. So this tutorial is going to go over my preferences that I have changed and why I changed them. There's quite a bit, so sit back, follow along, and hopefully this will help your Photoshop experience. As you can see, I have set my Photoshop back to its default settings, and I have one of my recent sketches up as well, so that I have layers and something to actually look at. So first, let's change the windows. Let's get rid of the libraries panel. It's pretty much useless, unless you're like communicating with other Photoshop programs, like Animate, or if you're working like in a team. But since I work alone, this panel is basically useless. So I click and hold to drag it out, and I can exit it out. Next, let's remove the colors and the swatches. Now, I know what you're thinking. Don't freak out. Like, how do I pick colors? So to pick colors, a neat little trick, actually, is you can click on your color over here on the tools, and if you click on it, so I just clicked on my color right there, it opens it up in the color wheel. So the color wheel opens up on its own. And actually, this is a slightly different color wheel than what is on the window by default, because you got all these hue saturation, and you even have the hexadecimal code, which I really enjoy if I'm doing anything web-based. And then when you find a color that you like, so I want this color, you can click OK. It automatically closes the window for you. So now I have the red that I can work with. And it's that simple. Because you're not opening the color that often, it doesn't need to be open constantly. If it's over here the whole time, it's just taking up space on your screen, showing colors that you probably may be using for 15 minutes at a time. You really only pick colors at the beginning, and you really, in the late game, you should be alt-clicking to find the color that you need to use next. So you can just click anywhere and alt-click, and now you have that color. And that's how I pick colors in the late stages of the thing, and I never even have to open up the color wheel, basically. So anyway, back to Windows. Remove the properties. That one's pretty much useless. Remove the Adjustments tab, because all of the adjustments are actually right here on the layer group. These are the exact same buttons. So you don't even need to have that open. Get rid of the paths. I don't even know what the paths one does, to be perfectly honest. The channels I do use sometimes. If you have like the blue channel, you can take the blue channel, highlight the blue channel, and then you can move it, and you can move just the blues, and that can create cool like magic effects if you're doing stuff with magic. So that's kind of why I keep the channels open. The Layers tab is the most important tab out of everything. And this little tab right here, if I click on this arrow, I don't know why this one of all the tabs decides that it likes to be hidden, but it's the History tab. And I like the History tab because it allows me to go way far back in the history if I want to change something. So these are all the tabs, but another thing that I like to do with the tabs is have them be floating. So if I grab the tab and drag it out, it's now floating on the window, and I like to do that with the tools over here as well. So the reason I like to have the floating documents instead of the docked panels is because when I zoom in, now the Layers tab kind of goes over, so now I have extra space to work with, like up here and down here, that wasn't available to me when it was docked. So that's why I like to have the panels be floating, and I just think it looks prettier this way. I don't know. I also extend the Layers tab all the way out as far as it can go, because by default it's scrunched up like this, and it's really hard to find the layer that you want because you're having to scroll through all of these just to find it. So I like to keep the Layer tab really big so that I can always find what layer I'm working on. There is actually one more panel that isn't open by default that I like to have open, and to open it you have to go into Window, and all of these are the tabs or the panels that Photoshop has at its disposal. So if you liked any of the tabs that we deleted, like you have a strong preference of you really want that open because you find it useful, you don't like the way I do colors, which is perfectly fine, you can always open up panels again using the window tab. So say you really like the color tab, you can open up the color tab again. But the tab that I use is the Navigator tab, and I don't know why it opens up over there. I like it over here, docked to the tools. So what the Navigator tab is supposed to be used for is this scroll wheel, or this slider allows you to zoom in really fast and easy, and it shows you where you are on the document. That isn't what I use it for, though. What I actually use it for is when I'm zoomed in really far, working on something, I can now see the whole painting in the Navigator tab to the side. And this is really useful because you get a huge overview of what your painting is looking like. And that's what a lot of beginners mess up, is they work really small, really fast, like way too quickly into the process, and they will make this area really detailed, but then they'll forget about the bigger picture. Like, they'll really detail this shoulder blade to perfection, but then they'll realize that the shoulder blade is clearly too big in comparison to the head. That's why you gotta look at the picture from a bigger standpoint, and that's what the Navigator allows me to do, even if I'm zoomed in, so I can constantly look at the bigger picture. This histogram thing is kind of useless, though, so I like to take it out. Alright, now that is my workspace completed, but there is a bunch of preferences that I do. So, under Edit and Preferences, go to General, and in General, go to Tools. Don't show tooltips, because they're like access windows. If you've already used Photoshop, tooltips is useless, basically. Enable gestures. These, paired with Windows Ink, cause way more problems than they're worth, so make sure to disable enable gestures. That was really hard to say. Do click over scroll. No flick panning, that's along with the gestures thing. Shift key for tool switch. That's really useful if you're trying to pick on a thing that you want, so I like to keep that on. Do zoom with scroll wheel, and declick animated zoom. This is by far the most useful thing. This is how I zoom in and out of Photoshop, is with the scroll wheel. Because by default it is Alt scroll, and that really annoys me. Why press the extra button when you can just scroll with the mouse wheel? And with all of this gestures disabled, the scroll wheel is now really the only thing that will zoom in and out. So now I can just click the scroll wheel, and this is really useful because wherever my cursor is, where I scroll is where I zoom into, so it makes it really easy to find where I'm working, and over scroll allows me to scroll completely off of the page, so I'm able to get stuff on the very edge of the painting into the center if I need to work on them. Alright, another thing that I do in Preferences, so Edit, Preferences, General, under the Guides, Grids, and Slices, is I set grid line to every 100% and subdivisions 3. And if you'll notice, it creates a grid on the canvas that's in the rule of thirds. And if this grid isn't showing up for you, I believe by default you have to enable grids under View, Extras, Show Grid. Also disable snap, because I have snap on right now, and what you'll notice that it does is when you get to the grid, it will snap to the line, and you'll get this weird like blip, like it's really bad here where it snapped to the line, and that's really annoying when you have the grids on. So I disable snap by unchecking that here, so now it shouldn't do that, and it works just fine. And this is a rule of thirds, that's why it's every 100%, and if you don't know why the rule of thirds is super useful, look at my other tutorial on composition and how I use the rule of thirds to make my paintings look good. Also, this grid's super useful because you can click Control-H now, and the grid will go away whenever you want. So, Control-H on, I want to use the grid to find something, and turned it off, now I'm painting. So that's it for settings, but there are a few keyboard shortcuts that I use as well. So under Edit, and then right above Preferences, there's keyboard shortcuts. Under Edit, I change Undo Redo to Control-Alt-Z. I change Step Forward to Control-Y, and I change Step Backwards to Control-Z. And this is how every other program works, like their Undo Redo setup, works with these keyboard shortcuts. Even Adobe Animate, which is made by Photoshop, uses this same keyboard setup. I don't know why Photoshop had to be different in this particular case, so I switch it to that. One last keyboard shortcut that I do under Image, and you have to scroll all the way down to Flip Canvas Horizontal. I change that. I give it a keyboard shortcut. It doesn't have one by default, to Control-I. This little exclamation point says that Control-I is already a keyboard shortcut, but you can accept and go to Conflict, and it shows that Control-I used to be for inverting your selection, which I don't really need a keyboard shortcut for, so I just leave that one blank, but you can change it to whatever you want if you want a keyboard shortcut for that. That's it for all of the preferences and keyboard shortcut changes, but now let's make Photoshop fast. The Photoshop brush, by default, is really weird because it is really slow for some reason, especially on older computers. So there is stuff you can change to fix it, but as a preface to explain this, most of this information I have gotten from another artist YouTuber named Borodante. Look him up. He's a way better artist than I am, and most of these settings are his changes. But I felt like I'd go over them anyway because they are a change that I made to my Photoshop, and it does make Photoshop run way better, so I thought I'd go over them anyway. There might be like a link in the description or an iCard to link to that video that I got this information from. To fix Photoshop, go to Edit, and then Preferences, and then General again. You know the drill. And then go to Performance. And then in Performance, under Advanced Settings, you want to change Drawing Mode to Basic. This makes your CPU do more of the work than your graphics processor, because the CPU is the more powerful part of your computer, and being able to use the CPU to help when you're using Photoshop to run makes it run a lot faster, especially on computers that have bad graphics cards. Set the cache levels to 2, and the cache tile size to the smallest thing. So what the cache tile size is it is a square that needs to be updated whenever you make a stroke. So when you make a stroke, it's actually drawing a square around that stroke, and it's updating only that spot to save on performance. So the smaller the cache tile size is, the better Photoshop will work when you're making super small strokes, because that means it doesn't have to update as much of the screen, but it also may slow down the huge strokes a little bit. And this really isn't an issue, though, because for most computers, big strokes are going to lag either way. So this prevents lag in one area and doesn't really fix the other one, but the other area is going to lag anyway, so it helps. Now, there is one last issue with Photoshop being slow, and that is Windows Ink. And Windows Ink was originally designed to work with touchscreens and to work with gestures and fingers, like if you're using your computer as a touchscreen. It was invented when Windows came out with those computers that flipped back and turned into touchscreens. So it works fantastic for fingers, but it is absolutely atrocious for Wacom tablets. For example, if you're making a really small stroke, like a stroke that's that small, it may not realize that it was a stroke. It may actually think that it was a button press, so you'd end up with just a dot, and that's really annoying. Another thing is if you're working in a small area for too long of a time, like say I'm shading this thumb, it may think that you're pressing and holding, and when it presses and holds, it actually opens up the brush menu, like your brush settings, and that's really annoying because then you gotta X out the brush settings, and it just slows down your workflow. So, but then the other issue is you can't turn off Windows Ink, because when you go into Wacom tablet settings, if you go into Wacom tablet properties, there's this little check mark for use Windows Ink. Yours will be on by default, mine is off. If you turn Windows Ink off, your pressure sensitivity and tilt and opacity on your Wacom tablet will completely disappear. Because Windows Ink is what is causing that to happen. So it really screws up how Photoshop works. But if you're smart, you'll have But you may have noticed that my Windows Ink is turned off, and my pressure sensitivity is still working. So that is the fix that I'm going to share with you today. You can't actually turn it off. That's why I would actually turn it off, so I could show you that it's not working. But check on your computer, if you have a Wacom tablet, turn off Windows Ink, and see what happens when when Windows Ink is off. See if the pressure sensitivity goes away. Let me know in the comments, because I believe it worked, but I did this so long ago that I actually don't remember if that's how it happened. So let me know in the comments if when you turn off Windows Ink, your pressure sensitivity and tilt goes away. So here's how you fix it. First, close out Photoshop. Yeah, sure, why not? I'll say. Open up Notepad. Don't freak out, this is really easy. Open up Notepad. So now you have Notepad open. Then you only need to write 2 lines. You need to write use WinTab, hashtag use WinTab, and UseSystemStylus 0. Basically, WinTab was what Wacom tablets used originally before Windows created Windows Ink. It used WinTab, and WinTab was way better for the tablets. So, but there's not a setting change anymore in like Windows 10 settings that can turn on WinTab anymore. It forces you to use Windows Ink. So this will manually do it. So, hashtag use WinTab and use SystemStylus 0. This text will be in the description. You can easily just copy paste it. So file and then save as, and you need to save this file as a very specific name. You need to save it as PSUserConfig.txt. Make sure that all of this capitalization is correct. Once again, this will be in the description so that you can look at it, or you can copy it for yourself. This has to be the very specific name, or else Photoshop can't communicate with it, and save it to your desktop. Make sure you save it to your desktop. So there it is down here. We can close that. So here it is right here. Then you're going to go to your start window, and you're going to type in %, appdata %, and this will open up this roaming folder, and it's important that you find this folder via appdata%, because this folder you actually can't find in the file directory without typing it in like this. It's like a hidden folder. So under roaming, once you're in this folder, go to Adobe, go to Photoshop, and go to Photoshop settings. You'll notice that my PSUserConfig.txt is already in here, right here. And so all you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take your PSUserConfig and drag it and drop it. But I'm not going to do that because I already have one. So just take your desktop, drag and drop, and you should be done. Now the only thing you have to do is open up your Wacom tablet settings and turn off Windows Ink. Make sure that when you turn off Windows Ink, it's not all applications, but just Photoshop as an application, because this fix only works for Photoshop. So if you're using, say, like Animate CC, this will now break your pressure sensitivity on Animate CC. So make sure that you only turn Windows Ink off for Photoshop and only Photoshop, but leave Windows Ink on for all other applications. That's it. Now your Photoshop should be fixed. Windows Ink can now be turned off and work with Photoshop, but you still have pressure sensitivity and opacity. That's everything I do in Photoshop. Thank you everyone for watching. I hoped this helped and will make your Photoshop experience run smoother. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe and see all of my other cool stuff. Bye! Quick postscript. Animation, it's happening. It's going halfway done, almost done, and when it does be posted in like I don't know, a month, that's probably how long it's gonna take me to finish it. That's it. Bye.